Hello and welcome. My name is Leah Kopke. This is my 3D modeling podcast, Ambient 3D Animations. Today I thought we'd do something a little bit different than usual. Instead of going over another 3D modeling tool or generator or Pyro or any of that inside of Cinema 4D, I thought that I'd go through my process doing a little experiment inside of Cinema 4D. So I was just trying things out, making textures inside of Illustrator. So I made these flowers here, made displacement maps and such. I had made a transmission weight map and had experimented with this to create this. And I had posted this on LinkedIn. At the time, I didn't really think too much about it, but there seemed to be a lot of interest in this and how I had created this in Illustrator. I took a normal cube like this and was able to texture it so that it looks very 3D and it has these flowers on it. And this was really more experimental than anything that I felt was very refined. And you'll notice that the pattern on it may look similar to you. I started creating this after I made the episode on how to use the relief generator to create the hematite pendant necklace, but this is actually using just a Redshift material in here. In a displacement map, I have a transmission map that I have going into the weight. I have the rose color. And when I click Start IPR, you'll see this actually becomes 3D, which is pretty cool. So I had a lot of fun working on this. And you could see that if I were to switch out this material I have here with just a normal white material, it just ends up looking like a white cube. Pretty simple. So the entire difference is this texture. So I want to go ahead and walk through how I made these in Illustrator a little bit and just some of my thought process so that if you want to make something, you can. I don't know why this is showing up right now. How do I make it go away? There we go. So anyways, in here, you'll see that I use these gradients for in here. And if you're not super familiar with Illustrator, if you go into Window, you can find your gradient panel. You'll see mine's kept over here to the side. You might have a different layout than me, but you can always find it using that window drop down. And you can add in different colors here. You can adjust them. I could make this pink if I wanted to, and I could adjust this one as well. You can add in new ones here. You'll see this little plus icon show up. So I had gone ahead and added these in. And if you click Edit Gradient, you'll see that you get this here, and if you hover over this, you'll see a scale button, and then I can make this larger or smaller. And if I move my mouse over here, you'll see a rotation option. So I find it's just really important to make sure that the gradient is running all the way through whatever your shape is. And in case if you're very new to Illustrator, I just drew these using the pen tool. So I had traced some shapes. And you can make a lot of curves by clicking and dragging your mouse. You'll get these handles in here. If you just click without dragging, you'll get these pointed shapes here. So that's basically how you draw with it. And I find it really helpful to use a reference while tracing That means you could sketch your own flowers from real life. You could use a photo. If you're into photography, you can use something like that. I had grabbed an image from Google, just going to drag and drop it in here, of these roses. And I just made a lot of little changes to them and rearranged them and adjusted them. But I used these as a reference while I was working on this. And the cool thing about gradients is that you can do it more with just interior shapes. So you'll see for these little stitches here, I had gone under stroke. So when I have this selected, I can look at the stroke in here, and you'll see I have dashed line turn on, and that makes it look dashed. You can adjust the weight of it here. So I made mine 39 points. And in here, you can also, very similar to the fill color, you can add a gradient to your stroke. So I had added these in here. And just keep in mind that this is for the color channel. So right now, these are the colors. And the reason why I decided to outline these petals a little bit with a stroke is because it helps make the edges look a little bit neater when you're using the displacement. So if we look at our displacement map here, this is what's making the surfaces go in and out. I'll actually show an example on here. So I have this material in here, I have the displacement. If I take out the displacement, it'll look flat. So I'm going to wait for this to update. And this is our material, our nodes. So now it just looks completely flat. The flowers don't look as 3D anymore. So this displacement is what's popping them out to look 3D. And then the color is going over that. But there's this transition part in between that I feel is very important, where I feel like putting a stroke helps. So let me zoom in here. So we're looking very closely at this flower here. And you'll see that we have these little transition areas where we're going from a high point to a low point. And if you don't put a stroke around your color, you aren't determining what color will be along that side. So you can control what that side will look like when it's going from that high point to that low point, and have a little bit of control over that transition by putting stroke around the flowers or your shapes in general. And I used a gradient to create this colored gradient for the stem. I put a light inside of the cube so that I could show you that you can also use this to control more glass-like elements within the material too. So let's talk a little bit about that as well. So I used the rose color not just for the color of the Redshift standard material. I used it for the color of the transmission. So you'll notice that the glass looks a little bit green. And it looks a little bit green because I made this green in here. It's a very dark green, but that's why the glass is green, is because I'm also using this color channel to control that. If you wanted to, you could make a whole separate material to control that, or even enter it in manually in here. So you'll find your transmission. If I click on the Redshift standard, you'll see your transmission down here. instead of using a color from this, you could choose to enter in your very own. Like I could make it blue. And now you can see that's this very cool color. I might try a darker blue because that's a little intense. Like that. So now you can see it's this aqua-ish color. So that's controlling the transmission color. You can either enter in a color manually or you could adjust it with a texture that you make inside of here. So that's what I had done. As far as the transmission weight, I'm gonna go ahead and open up this Illustrator file. You'll see this here. And the white value is saying, yes, this is transmissive, this is going to be clear. The black areas are going to be opaque. Anything in between will be a combination of the two. So you have complete control over which areas are glass and which areas aren't. How see-through are they? So I use this to control that. Something else I'd like to talk about with this displacement is that you'll notice that the lighter areas are raised more and the darker areas are not raised, are lowered. So when you're thinking about how you want this to look when you add it to a material or to an object as a material, you want to think of what areas do I want to be raised and what areas do I want to be pushed back down. So I wanted the petals to kind of look like they were popping out, so I made them a dark to light gradient from the inside out, basically, in order to create this illusion. I'm going to go ahead and add the rose color back to the transmission color. And if you aren't seeing something in here, you can always do this, just drag it on top, and then you can look through all of these options and find what you're looking for. So I'm just going to click away because I don't actually want to add that to anything else, but I think it looks nicer with that green color, so I wanted it to go back to that. Another really important thing to keep in mind is that your rose displacement won't work unless if you have a Redshift tag. So you can see I have a Redshift tag added on here. If you do not have a Redshift tag, all you need to do is right click, go into render tags, Redshift object, click on that right there, and you'll get one. As far as the settings inside of the geometry tab, I checked override. I made sure that tessellation was turned off because I actually just added more segments to the cube itself. Tessellation will subdivide and add segments, but I just, again, did on the cube, so I didn't really need to do it in here. I guess you could use that if you wanted to. I chose not to. And then for displacement, I checked this on. And you'll need to have this checked or else it will not work. So I'll check this off just to show you what happens if it's off. And this will go through the process again. And you can see everything is flat. So if your cube looks flat and you don't know why after you've gone through this whole process of making the textures, you just need to go ahead and check this on. And you can adjust your maximum displacement and your displacement scale in here. If your corners don't look right, it's really important to make sure that on your displacement map, if your edges don't look right on your cube, make sure that on your displacement map that the color that's your background color goes all the way past the edge, because if there's like a thin 1 pixel line of white, it's going to tell Redshift this part is supposed to be raised, and then you'll have these really weird shaped edges on your cube. and it'll look a little funky. So just be careful that your texture goes all the way to the edge or past it even, just to double check that everything's right. You'll notice that I even did this on the color just to make sure we don't have that white at the edge. And that's basically how I went about it. But it was really fun making these. And I focused on doing this on a cube because within the material tag, it'll look correct even with the UVW mapping turned on. I didn't have to UV map this at all, or do what we did for when we 3D modeled this hand, where we had to actually UV wrap the object because it was complex. But for something like a cube, this is a great way to get familiar with displacement maps and how they work, color maps and how they work, and just try out different things and be experimental and become familiar with all of these settings inside of the material. So it's a really nice way to become familiar. And with just three textures, basically, I could create this. But you could create more than that. You could create one for metalness and make something that looks metallic. You could create something that controls the roughness, so we could increase the roughness a little bit here if we wanted to. So you'll see that there's all of these great options in here, and you can control all of these by making a texture pretty much. And once you start feeling really comfortable with this, you could also UV map something more complicated than a cube. I think this could be fun for a situation where you're making something like a vase and you want it to be really ornate and add on those details. Something that I'd like to show you is we talked about subdivisions and how they're really important. You'll see that in order to get that shape of the flowers on here, if I turn on garage shading lines, I had made this a really dense mesh. Now I know that's not usually what you're supposed to do, but the reason why I did that is that I needed that number of subdivisions in order to get a really clear shape on these flowers. So I'm actually going to turn off the IPR in a moment. You'll see these edges look pretty clean because I have a really high subdivision count. So then from far away, look a little bit further away, it looks really nice and smooth. If you were to, let's say for this first cube, if I go ahead and reduce this to something like 50 by 50 by 50, now you can see this is much lower poly. And if we were to add the texture now to this lower poly cube and hit render, it'll take a couple seconds, but you'll see that it isn't quite as high resolution as the one on the left. So you'll see that it looks a little bit more wobbly than the other one. The edges aren't quite as clean because there's not as much information. So if you're starting a material from scratch and you don't know where to find it, you just go under the Create menu, Materials, and I added in a standard Redshift material. You'll need to make sure that in here you have render set as Redshift, and then you'll be able to work with this. If you double click on it, you'll get another window and you'll be able to see this here. Right now, it's all gray, but you can drag and drop your textures that you export from Illustrator. And once you do that, you can simply just drag and drop them into here. So let's see, I have the color node, so that would plug into the color. I have the rose displacement, so I'll need to add in a displacement node. So I hit the plus here, and I look for displacement, and we'll see it's right here. Now this one's a little bit tricky because it actually, instead of plugging into the Redshift standard node that plugs into the output, we want this to go into the displacement on the output. And our displacement goes into here. So we're connecting all these nodes. One leads to another, and it tells Cinema 4D this texture is what we're using for this today. So that Cinema 4D knows. And then I can add in, we're missing the transmission. So you can go ahead and plug in your transmission. In here, so base properties, transmission, weight. So this is controlling how much that transmission is being affected in different areas. And then whatever you'd like to use for your transmission color, I'm going to use the color. You can put that within base properties transmission color. And there you go. You can make other little adjustments in here, add in some roughness, make it more shiny, make it more metallic in here. You can really do anything you'd like. And then once you add this material to your object, just make sure, again, as a quick review, make sure that you have enough segments on your object so that when you click render, it'll show up, and make sure that you add in your Redshift tag, and then you'll be all good to go, and you'll have a beautiful flowery cube. I'm going to actually go ahead and make this other one white for now, the other cube that's low poly. It'll take a little moment to update. And then you'll see this is our material. And of course, you can do what I did real quick and make further adjustments. So you can adjust the displacement, you can adjust the scale of this. Maybe I feel like this is too much and I'll make it 0.5, and that'll lower it a little bit. It'll take a moment to update. And then there you go. You can see that the height of the flowers has gone down. You can adjust the max and min a little bit if you want. To control the height. If you right click on the arrow of the setting, it'll set it back to the default. So that's a quick overview of what I had done. I hope you found this helpful and interesting. I enjoyed doing this little experiment on my computer. I feel like it's helped me become better at understanding how textures work, and also just finding some new creative ways to work with them using Illustrator, because I think this could apply to a lot of interesting circumstances. You could also make these inside of Photoshop, and it's such a fun thing to do. You could even make these textures by hand with paper and pencil, and then scan them in and use them in here. So it's a fun thing to try out, and I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you again next time here on Ambient 3D Animations.